Live. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the First Impressions podcast. I am Kristen, and I am joined by my dear friend Maggie. We are your First Impressions podcasters. And
hello, everyone.
This is a podcast. I never give her space to say hello. I just talk right over.
It's true. I just bust in, though. It's my way.
It's a podcast about our love for Jane Austen and a space where we can talk about it away from the haters and all the people who want to make fun of us. And
what do we give to the people who make fun of us, Kristen?
We give a big middle finger. We might even give two middle fingers this episode. Oh, I gotta be. I was doing it for the video. I gotta be careful. I don't want to be too vulgar for the YouTube video because people can actually see. So we are doing this podcast over Google Hangouts on Air. It's another one that you could view on the YouTube channel if you so chose. Although I am not wearing any makeup.
Well, I'm not either. I mean, let's be honest. I don't think people are really going to sit there and watch
us
talking heads for hours. Yeah. I think that they're like me, listen to it when they're at work.
Yes, and
or cleaning the house.
All very data interesting.
They're in a bath. They're in a bubble bath with a glass of wine and their headphones, listening to me and Kristen pontificate on Jane Austen.
Their me time. Their Jane Austen me time.
So, Kristen, why don't you tell everyone why we are recording over Google Hangouts?
Well, Maggie and I used to be located in the same physical area, Northern Virginia. I have now moved to Boise, Idaho. My husband got a new job in Boise. And
so did you. You got a new job, too.
That's true. I have a new job, and I have a new office in Boise, and everybody is really nice to me. And by the way, this is a lesson. It's the hard lesson to learn. But like we all grew up saying Boise with a Z. But when you move here, everybody tells you right away it's not pronounced that way. So don't pronounce it that way because people will be like, know right away that you're not a native. It's Boise with a very soft.
Are you serious?
So you have to say Boise.
Boise.
Yeah.
Boise. But where is the emphasis on the syllable? Is it Boise or is it Boise?
It's
Boise.
It's the
like
first.
Where do you hit the B? Boise. You hit the B.
Boise, exactly. And so it's Boise. Like Boise. I mean, when you say Boise, but you have to say Boise because
I live in Boise now.
Boise. I don't know why everybody's so into it, but I mean, it comes from the French word bois, which means tree.
Boise.
So anyway, side tangent. Jane Austen, Boise, Idaho connection with Jane Austen. Yeah, and of course
she traveled here in her youth.
What's that?
She traveled in her youth. Boise in her youth.
Yeah, that's right. Much of Mansfield Park was based on my 1960s mid-century modern home.
True. The especially.
But even during the whole chaotic occasion, time period up until my move, we've been doing some episodes that have been a little easier on me because we haven't been doing the major novels. We've been doing like movie commentary and special guest Arnie. And so now we're back to an actual, we're going to talk about the text. Today we're going to talk about Lady Susan. Not a major work, but original Austen work nonetheless. And as many of you know, Love and Friendship is coming out. And so our next podcast after this will be about the movie. But today we were going to talk specifically about the book, the novella, and which, of course, like all of Austen's works, is available online. It's there's no copyright on it. It's just it wasn't published until about 50 years after her death.
So I had actually never heard of it before. I think you sent me the trailer, or you posted it on our Facebook page, on the First Impressions Facebook page. And so that is when I assumed that I'd heard of Lady Susan before, but I'd never really thought of it as one of the major books, like as a Jane Austen novel. So I hadn't read it. So I lied when I said that Northanger Abbey was the only one I hadn't read, because I had obviously not read Lady Susan until I just did. So like you were saying, it was published 50 years after she died. So from what I read, it was written in 1794.
Yes,
and
when
then
she
not
was
published
only
until 1871.
And it's really interesting work to read when you're like a scholar of Austen's life and her evolution as a writer, because it really is the first one of the first pieces that really stands on its own and that you can like read as though it's a book. I mean, she finished other things, of course. She was like 18 years old, I believe, when it was written, if we take the 1794 as you know, the year it was written. And she wrote it before she started, or, you know, before she really sunk her teeth into writing Eleanor and Marianne, which of course is the name of the first draft of what later became Sense and Sensibility.
And Lady Susan,
and
Lady Susan is like the first draft of Sense and Sensibility, an epistolary novel, which means that it is written in the forms of letters from the characters to each other.
Yes, Eleanor and Marianne is epistolary, and of course, Lady Susan is epistolary. Right. So at this time, she was experimenting with this style of writing, and I think that this is key. I think this is a key to understanding Austen and unlocking Austen, because this idea of the epistolary form, where you get letters back and forth from the same author but two different people, highlights the way we are different. It's our own personal multiple personality disorder. In other words, we present ourselves very differently to someone we don't know as well versus our BFF, where we say any raunchy, hilarious thing that comes into our head. And I think that the dichotomy between who we really are and what we really think in this inside and who we have to present to the world is a key to Austen. I mean, you see that over and over in her characters. When, you know, Elizabeth Bennet, of course, she's so much smarter than everybody else, but she still treats them with respect. She has to put her mind into a place where she presents herself. She doesn't present her real, true self. And we can't do that. And that's the key to Austen, is exploring how to live your life and deal with that problem. And I think that the very beginning of Lady Susan, I mean, when you start it, it's Lady Susan writes 2 letters in a row.
Well, let's wait before we.
Oh, that's right, because we got to do a plot summary.
Yeah, we're going to do a plot summary. But and just talking about the epistolary format in general, I generally hate epistolary novels. I think Dracula is a very famous example of an epistolary novel. I tried to read the huge novel Clarissa when I was in high school, which was a very successful epistolary novel of the time, I think of the 19th century. And I just have always disliked the format. But what you were saying about how it shows different sides of the characters, I loved it for Lady Susan, and I thought it worked really well. And as you'll see when we talk about her, because she is basically a sociopath,
yeah.
So her ability to hide her character and present different faces is basically all that she does. So this format works remarkably well for examining her character and her acting ability and the different masks she wears with different people. So I think just talking about the format in general, it works really well for this novel.
And here's another interesting key or fact about Austen's life, is that her sister Cassandra, after, you know, Jane Austen died, burned a huge number of letters. Mm-hmm. And why did she? And then, in addition, you know, later Austen's niece burned another trove of Austen's letters. You know, we can assume that it's because these letters between Jane and Cassandra, Jane was saying her true opinions about people and being
maybe
funny.
She was totally catty.
That has to be it. I mean, they were so close, this female friendship, and they could say anything to each other, and so of course
they were talking about like the cute butts in the neighborhood, and
and this is the other thing that I think is fascinating, is that there is a passage in Persuasion, and of course we'll talk about that much later, where the main character Anne Elliot reads a letter that is very not complimentary to her and her family. It's written by someone else. She gets to read this private correspondence, and it makes her blush. And then she thinks, but no one can be judged on what they write in their private correspondence towards others. And I think that's Austen saying that a little bit for herself.
Yeah,
she doesn't want to be judged.
Please don't. I mean, you don't want to read the text that like Kristen and I send each other.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Kristen and Maggie, they seem so nice. Like, oh.
Well, and that's why certain things aren't admissible in court, right? Like, don't,
Right.
you're really turning on me, but yeah, some things are inadmissible because it's just people BSing.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Okay, so well, let me ask you a question. Just because you were talking about burning the letters and how it was published 50 years after her death, do you happen to know who got Lady Susan published? I assume it was someone who was, inherited her letters and the estate, and then with her popularity after her death was probably capitalizing on that.
Oh man, I should know. I meant
Okay,
to
well,
look
maybe
it up.
we can look into that and discuss it at the top of the next episode.
The next episode.
Or if anybody knows when we put this episode up, they can feel free to comment on the Facebook page.
Man, this is gonna drive me nuts. I meant to look this up before the podcast, but I was busy lurking. I was busy looking at futons and settees and all this.
You are supposed to be the brains of this operation. You're the brains. I'm the boobs. I mean, the funny.
Yeah.
No, Kristen, you just moved cross country. It's fine. Don't beat yourself up. Don't worry about it.
Okay, I'm going to assume that she gained in popularity and people were like clamoring for more, and then it's like Tupac where they have to release
or Michael Jackson, yeah. And now it's going to be Prince, right? There's going to be like 20 Prince albums that come out.
Yeah, well, it's nice to think of it too. I mean, she never had a chance to take it and repolish it. It's probably pretty much a first draft, and it's fantastic for all of that.
I loved it.
She wrote it for the entertainment of herself and her family, and
it reminded me of Northanger Abbey, right? The kind of snarky, self-aware.
Oh yeah,
everything I loved about Northanger Abbey, I loved about Lady Susan. Okay, so let's give our listeners a brief plot summary.
Yes, and I always thought the plot of this book was kind of simple. But watching the Whit Stillman adaptation, which I have seen, it really forced me to confront how many characters there actually are. So, to be perfectly blunt, let's set the stage, or simple. Let's set the stage. Lady Susan Vernon. Lady Susan Vernon was married to a rich man who is dead. She has
like 6 months ago, ish.
Exactly.
Right.
And then they sort of got themselves into bad financial straits. And they lived in a place called Vernon Castle. I mean, she was, but they've been reduced now. Lady Susan and her daughter, they have no money. They had to sell the estate. They have no place to go. So they don't live, they visit, to steal a line from the movie. And they're bouncing from friends, these rich estates.
They're couch surfing.
So rather than going directly to her brother-in-law's house, now she has a brother-in-law, the brother of the man who died. His name is Charles Vernon. But she doesn't go there right away. Instead, she goes to stay with some family friends, the Manwarings.
In Langford.
Langford. And Mr. Manwaring is a married man, but he's incredibly charming. And Lady Susan actually just has feelings for him and finds him a delightful, charming man and flirts with him. And not only does she flirt with him shamelessly, but there is another young woman, Miss Manwaring, unmarried woman, who is trying to ensnare a rich man named James Martin. So not only does Lady Susan flirt with Manwaring, she flirts with this other rich man, James Martin. And this is a weird machination that she apparently has the ability to do this, but she makes him fall in love with her, Lady Susan, and then transfer his affections to Lady Susan's daughter, Frederica. So she's setting up this rich marriage for her daughter, Frederica, with this rich simpleton. He's a Mr. Rushworth character, Sir James Martin, and he's a ridiculous, goofy character in the Austen mold.
Okay, so Kristen, let me kind of just break it down simply for people who are just like, what? So Lady Susan's like 35, hot, formerly rich. So she needs to get married again to get money again. She goes to this house where she knows there's these hot guys. She basically has an affair with the married guy, also gets the single stupid guy to fall in love with her, and wants him to marry her daughter. So she wants to have her married guy on the side and then get Sir James to marry Frederica. Boom.
Yes. Yes, and this is a thread throughout the plot, is trying to get Sir James to marry Frederica, who is a nice girl and doesn't want to marry an idiot. And that's pretty much the driver of the plot. And at the beginning...
They basically get found out. I mean, it all happens off page before the novel even starts. She's leaving Langford because I think Mrs. Manwaring kind of finds out that Lady Susan and her husband are shacking up. And she's like, oh, no.
Yep.
So it's common knowledge that this has been going on. People know.
Yes. And so Lady Susan sends her daughter to London. And Frederica goes to London. She's not even in the first part of the book. Rather, that Lady Susan goes now because she can't stay at Langford anymore because the females of the family are united against her.
Yeah.
So she goes to stay with this unfortunate brother-in-law. And the main letter writer on that side of the story is Catherine, who is married to the brother-in-law. So Catherine, and she knows Lady Susan is a sociopath and not a good person.
She knows she's full of it. She knows she's full of it. So Lady Susan writes these flowery letters like, I'd be delighted to join you at Churchill, my dear brother, meet your wife, who, by the way, Lady Susan tried to stop him from marrying. She didn't like Catherine.
Yes.
And Catherine totally sees through her the whole time. Totally sees through her.
And that's one of the fascinating things about this story is that when you read the correspondence between the families, that's all polite and flowery. Mm-hmm. And then when you have these two women sending letters off to other people, they talk so much smack about each other, right? Yeah. So this is the typical Austen situation of having to be very proper on your face and having very different feelings, inside. And when she arrives at, the brother-in-law's house, Churchill is the name of the house. She arrives at Churchill, and a new guy enters the story, Reginald de Courcy, who is actually the brother of this Catherine we were talking about. So he's an extended brother-in-law. So Reginald de Courcy comes. He wants to meet Lady Susan. He knows Lady Susan by reputation. In fact, all of London pretty much knows Lady Susan is a beautiful sociopath.
So he's heard about what happened at Langford, and he's like, well, I got to meet this lady, because who can get a married man to fall in love with her and a single guy? Like, who can juggle these many plots at one time? I got to meet her. So he comes into it supposedly with eyes wide open.
Yes, but he gets,
and he's just kind of there to watch the shit show, right? He just wants to see it go down.
And he's immediately
his
trapped
sister,
in the flypaper.
Catherine, writes to their mother, very concerned about Lady Susan coming, very concerned about Reginald coming, that he might fall victim to Lady Susan's seductions. But they're all like, oh, Reginald, he's got a good head on his shoulders. He knows who she is. He'll be fine. Nope.
Her powers are so great, and she is so beautiful. I like to think of her as this big spider, spinning this web.
Yes, like Shelob from Lord of the Rings.
Wow. And
with maybe a little less murder. When fandoms collide, everybody.
Only Arnie could see a murder in this book. Exactly. So
you've opened the door.
Oh, no.
Now I expect like Arnie to pop up in my Google Hangouts to be like, did somebody say shadow plot?
Yeah, and what's fascinating, one of the fun and fascinating things about the novella is to see Lady Susan tap dance through all of the allegations against her and convince Reginald that she's the wronged party and that everybody's just trying to slander her and gossip about her. And he totally falls for it.
He does.
He does. And Catherine watches this with concerned eyes, and at one point, Reginald's father even tries to intercede and says, Reginald, don't do this, blah, blah, blah.
Don't be an idiot, yeah. But his father, well, we can talk about it more in depth later, but I thought that letter was very interesting because he basically says, I'm not going to cut you out, and so my power is very limited, but I can't tell you who to marry, but, please don't marry this woman.
And when you consider what it would mean for the family line, I mean, she's already 35. She's at the end of her, fertile period or whatever.
Hey, you better watch it.
I think that's what part of the assumption was.
Oh my goodness, I'm just a dried up old maid, I
No,
guess.
of course that's not true anymore, but I'm sure, that was part of the consideration.
Mm.
If you're a Darcy, and De Courcy sounds a lot like Darcy to me. I've always thought that maybe,
Ah,
I don't know if there's any connection or she just likes the sound of the name or what. But anyway, he's
yeah.
the head of a rich family and he's got to make the right match. And so this is what people always had to deal with. It's like, oh, I want to marry who I love. In this case, of course, he loves a bad person, but
Right. So then when this is all going on, so Lady Susan is getting Reginald to fall in love with her and show herself as being this like perfect model woman. Catherine is freaking out. Their mother's freaking out. Lady Susan still wants to get Sir James to marry Frederica. And Frederica, who has been put up in like a ladies' school, decides to run away and is instantly caught.
mm-hmm.
Because apparently she's not very good at running away.
Right.
And Lady Susan always refers to her as being very stupid, which is not true.
No.
But because Lady Susan is a total sociopath, she refers to her daughter as stupid and stubborn and all this stuff. So Frederica ends up arriving at Churchill. She gets sent to Churchill.
Yes, she gets sent to Churchill, and then the sort of things sort of play out. The next thing that happens after she gets sent to Churchill is that Sir James Martin randomly arrives at Churchill. And all of a sudden, Lady Susan, who's trying to present herself as this loving mother to Reginald, who is a rich man who she's trying to ensnare, she has to tap dance around what's happening. So Reginald is a good guy, immediately perceives that, someone is trying to force Frederica into marriage with Sir James Martin, who's an idiot, and he's very troubled by this. So Lady Susan has to tap dance around this, and that's sort of fascinating to watch as well. And eventually, Frederica becomes so unhappy about the situation that she actually writes a letter and puts it into Reginald's hands. Now, Reginald thinks Frederica is sort of a little idiot because
she falls in love with Reginald too. Frederica starts to fall in love with Reginald because apparently he's handsome and charming and warm and nice and blah 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 blah.
Yeah. And who wouldn't be in love with him? And and so then they quarrel. A lot of the book is just them quarreling and you watching Lady Susan insinuate herself back into his affections.
Like he realizes she's awful, but wait, no, she convinces him she's not. But then he realizes she's awful again, but she's able to bring him back. Like it's just, she is amazing.
Yeah, she's amazing
as a character. So talk about what happens. So Lady Susan ends up leaving to go to London because she wants to visit her friend Alicia, who she's been writing letters to all this time and kind of exposing her true character as just this like total catty, selfish, money obsessed schemer. I mean, she's a schemer. There's no other, I can't think of a better word to describe her. She takes joy in plotting.
Yeah, and the correspondence between...
Oh my God, she's like Blair Waldorf from Gossip Girl.
Have
you ever watched Gossip Girl, Kristen?
No, I've never seen
She is. She is... Okay, so this character is like the rich queen bee of New York City elite, right? Teenagers. But she is only happy if she's scheming. There always has to be a scheme.
Yes, and there's a ton of scheming with Lady Susan, and the correspondence between Lady Susan and Alicia Johnson, her friend in town, is delightful because they are both the same kind of schemers with the same kind of values, and they talk about Reginald de Courcy. It's interesting to hear them talk about the hero outside of his context because they actually make a little bit of fun of him, and Lady Susan especially is like a little disturbed that she's always having to justify herself to him. And she's like, oh, a real lover would just take me at, like be like, oh, whatever you do is right, darling. And so she's sort of dissatisfied with the quality of his love because it's not all consuming. She doesn't understand the value of making someone with discretion love you. And
she's never had to work this hard, right?
She's never had to work exactly, and her unwillingness to sort of value that sort of is one of the keys to her undoing, basically. She has no conscience, really. Right. But anyway, she goes to London, and guess who shows up in London? Her lover, Mainwaring, who is insane.
But we find out we find out while she's in London that she and Reginald have actually become secretly engaged.
Yes.
Lady Susan and Reginald have become secretly engaged. And when Lady Susan is in London, the guy from Langford, the married man, Manwaring, like you were saying, shows up. And so she starts entertaining him again and using Alicia to kind of distract Reginald. And then Sir James is also showing up to get together with Frederica. It's just like a big mess. All of the guys that Lady Susan is trying to manipulate basically all show up, and you know what's going to happen.
Exactly. And with the big denouement is Reginald finds out finally about her and Manwaring. And the series of letters is so interesting because he writes to her and he says, I know what's going on.
Yeah, because he runs into Mrs. Manwaring, right?
Yes, who is a family connection of the Johnsons. So when Reginald is there with Alicia, Mrs. Manwaring comes in and is sad about her husband. He finds out about everything. And it's amazing. He writes to her and he says, I know everything. And she writes back and she says, I am astonished. And then the next letter is her writing to Alicia and saying, don't worry, I got it under control. I'll give her time tomorrow. Everything will be fine. But she's misjudged him. He actually has a breaking point, and she's reached it with him. He does have a moral backbone. She
writes him back. She's like, I can't believe you're writing me this. Like, please come by immediately so I can explain myself. And I think he even writes back and says, why are you writing me back?
Yeah, why would you write?
He's like, I told you, like, you're out, you're done. I don't ever want to hear from you again. Why are you even bothering to write me back? It's kind of like that scene in Pretty Woman where he's like, don't answer the phone, but keeps calling her. And she's like, well, then stop calling me. Because if you don't want me to answer the phone, stop calling me. But it's like, if you don't want her to write you back, like, stop writing her letter.
Stop writing. Just ignore it, man. But he's still, I think there's a little part of him that still wants to be convinced because that's the power of her and her seductiveness, But in the end,
her lady parts are like made of magic, apparently, or something like that. Because apparently nobody can resist.
Yes. He gets sucked back in.
Oh, wow. Okay, poor choice of words, Kristen.
Oh. Well, anyway, he doesn't get sucked back in, but I guess there's a little bit of that going on. A little bit of suckage, not maximum suckage.
Oh, okay. Let's move on. So let's talk about how things end up.
Things end up, well, she sort of gets her comeuppance because she says in the beginning, I won't marry Sir James. I'm trying to fob Frederica off onto Sir James. He is the rich guy who is an idiot. And in the end, Lady Susan, having lost the affection of Reginald, has to marry Sir James herself. And so that's her comeuppance, is that she gets to be married to an idiot. But Austen,
she gets the stupid husband.
Yes. And of course, Frederica, who Lady Susan really doesn't care about, she goes back to Churchill, and everybody forces Reginald to fall in love with Frederica, who's a nice girl.
I think there's an epilogue where we have a narrator who kind of fills us in. It says something about how, to the detriment of the British postal system, the the letter writing cannot continue among these characters, so a narrator steps in. But basically, Frederica is then brought up by Catherine Vernon and her family, and over the years, Reginald is taught to love her or something ridiculous like that. They basically, like, if your whole family is pushing for it, eventually he kind of comes
around. Again, But I always wonder about the happiness of Frederica and Reginald, because her character is developed a little bit, but mainly she's just scared and obviously has a little bit of backbone, sort of like the Fanny Price-esque, like, no, I won't marry this horrible guy. But the fact that all of Catherine Vernon's family wants them to get together, I always found a little bit too pat and easy. But of course, this is like a starter novel, and it's just cute,
And I think it's fair that it's a couple years later. I mean, she's in the house of his sister, so he's going to spend a lot of time with her. These people, I mean, we talk about this a lot. They don't have huge social groups. It's like if you went to a small high school, like, you're going to date the people in your small high school because they're the people you know.
She doesn't have any money, so it's kind of an emblem of the goodness of that side of the family, Catherine, and that they do want her happiness, and they do want her to get married to the the brother who's a rich guy, you know, he's like a Darcy, you know, he's like supposed to be carrying on the family line and the family tradition,
Right.
and rather than forcing him to get married to like some rich lady. And
so Frederica and Reginald end up down the line happily married. Catherine Vernon and her mother, Lady De Courcy, which is Lady De Courcy.
Yeah,
They end up happy because he married Frederica, who they all love, and she ends up being a really nice person. Alicia Johnson, Lady Susan's best friend, ends up having to just be married to her middle-aged, gout-ridden. They make a lot of jokes about his gout, which I found hilarious.
And of course, it's always like, you know,
it was
he never has
inconvenient.
gout.
Yeah.
It is convenient gout, inconvenient gout. He never has gout when I want to go to Bath.
Yeah, why can't he have a gout episode then, and then we could actually go. And then Lady Susan ends up married to a really stupid man. But it's not even that much of a comeuppance, right? Because he's still rich. And if he's that dumb, she will totally be able to run circles around him and still do whatever she wants.
Exactly. And it's
but that's why I like it, because she still kind of wins.
Yeah, she does.
People like that. And people like that do tend to win.
And that's why it's a wicked good time of a novel. And you know, Austen has this feminist streak where a woman who's smart and has control of her destiny, you know, that's kind of a good thing. We kind of celebrate that. You know, she's an awesome lady and she gets her fortune. And this novella has really one of the funniest endings in Austen, because she sort of sums up, she's transitioned from the epistolary style to this sort of epilogue where she's just a narrator now. And she's saying, oh, you know, Lady Susan married James Martin. We don't know how sorry to feel for her, but when you consider she only has her conscience and her dumb husband to contend with, and her conscience basically doesn't exist, she's probably fine.
Yeah.
And then at the end, she says, the only person we really have to feel sorry for is Miss Manwaring, the young girl.
Yes.
It's Miss Manwaring, the young girl who was trying to catch Sir James, who's not really a bit major.
Right. And why should we feel sorry for her, Kristen? Why do we feel sorry for Miss Johnson?
Because she went to town and spent 2 years worth of her clothing budget to be fashionable in town to try to catch him and didn't get him. She was robbed of her due by a woman like 10 years older than her or something. And that's why
I loved that ending. I thought it was really cute.
That's so Austen, you know, like trying to catch a man.
It's so Austen.
It's so
Hashtag
Austen.
That's so Austen. So Kristen, let me ask you a question. Do you think that if this book had been written by a man, do you think that Lady Susan's end of the story would have been very different? Lady Susan as a character. Do you think that it would have ended with her like, oh, okay, well, I'll just marry Sir James? Or do you think that it would have been more like a Mansfield Park style, public shaming, often lock herself away alone with her shame?
I absolutely agree with you. I think this is Austen's feminist streak coming out. And of course, she never meant to get it published. And that's probably one of the reasons why. I mean, she never.
It'd be pretty controversial, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Especially 50 years before it was actually published. I mean, culture and society can change a lot in 50 years. So, or actually, let's see, it was written in 1794, published 50 years after her death, but it was 70 years after it was written, if my math is correct, which is not a guarantee. So things could, I mean, I'm sure women, you know, our plight didn't improve that much in that 70 years, but still, like having written an ending like that and having a character who was very sexually free, if not outright stated, implied heavily, would have been, I think, very controversial at the time.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's a really valid point. Agreed.
Which is, of course, why I loved it. I think, what did I say to you? I emailed Kristen and I was like, she is a total sociopath and amazing, and I love her.
Amazing. And I think everybody who gets into the book sort of celebrates her. And with Stillman, I went to I'm kind of bringing this up when I probably should save it for when we discuss the actual movie and what he did with the story. But he even said, I would rather spend time with
the director of Love and Friendship?
Yes.
Okay.
He's like, I would rather do this adaptation than Emma. I would rather spend time with a delightfully wicked main character than sort of an idiot who's causing chaos wherever she goes blindly. Because you take so much delight in watching Lady Susan and what she does, and
it's true.
And that's the appeal of the Crawfords as well. I mean, we fall in love with them a little bit, even off of the page, just because you have to respect that sort of skilled social ability to manipulate.
Right. But, and I mean, that's the reason why people love Maleficent and Sleeping Beauty. Like, nobody cares about Aurora, right? Aurora's boring. Like, Maleficent she got her own movie. She got like a spin-off movie with Angelina Jolie because she's awesome and badass and evil and wicked, and we just love wicked people. Now, in real life, we don't love wicked people.
Yeah, and I think
if Lady was a real person, we would not like her.
And maybe this is another thing to bring up. Would we like Lady Susan just as much if she was Henry Crawford writing letters and not Lady Susan writing letters?
If she was a man.
Yeah, because there's a little bit of you can feel like she, in that, especially in that world, men had the upper hand to have. So to
I say, what I would not like that character.
Yeah, because you can almost respect. Ladies doing it for themselves, like women,
because the men have the power in that society,
she's just subverting that power.
Exactly. Yeah, so if a man was writing those letters and treating women like that, it's such a switch of the power dynamic that it then becomes like gross and kind of abusive and using your power, like to try to like get all these women who have the only thing that they have of themselves is getting married.
And that's, I guess, why we respect Lady Susan. She's a striver. She's working in a world that's harder for her to do that.
Right. So. It's like Working Girl. She's really just like Tess McGill in Working Girl. She's just trying to like get her way to the top, manipulate the system. I'm just dropping these references. Do you like this? I'm just dropping pop culture references tonight.
Our ability to relate Austen to like chick flicks,
to like late 80s movies.
We won't be like Arnie and say that they're directly influenced, but the themes are universal and they are still with us.
It also might be hard to say that Lady Susan has directly influenced
anybody
because it's very little known. It's not like
right.
I will plug it for people who haven't read it, who might be listening to this. It's a quick read. I would say it's a novella, really.
Yes, it's a novella.
It's not long. You can read it right through it. The only difficult thing about it is just trying to keep track of who is writing to who, because they would use like Lady Vernon, and you have to remember that's that's Catherine, that's her sister-in-law. Like, you have to kind of keep track of the relationships of the characters. Mm-hmm. But once you get that down, once you get the characters down, you'll just whip right through it. It's so fun. It's frothy. It's fun. It moves quickly. Can do it.
We believe in you. And yes. It's even said, explicitly stated, with Lady Susan and her friend Alicia writing to each other. They're talking about Reginald and getting him, and then Alicia Johnson says, James Martin is in town, I'm trying to keep things cool. If I were you, I would just marry the dumb rich guy because you have all the riches. I mean, that's on the table. That is not like the disastrous circumstances. And the way that they write to each other is so delightful. And when you start reading the story, the first letter, I almost said email, which is really funny. The first letter.
You could do an updated version of this through email.
You totally could.
Which would be really funny. You could really just do an updated version of this novel in a modern setting.
The first letter is short. It's from Lady Vernon to Catherine saying, "I'd love to come visit you," and it's very proper. And then immediately goes into a letter from Lady Susan to her friend Alicia, which is totally different in tone and style.
Yes.
And
oh God! Like, I have to get out of Langford. Like, the jig is up. I've written my brother.
Yeah, it's such a bummer. Oh, it's going to be awful going there. And she even says, she's like, later on. No, what she says in the first letter is, "Oh, I can't wait to meet your children," and pretends to have this family interest. And later she says to Alicia, she's like, I've learned one of them, the name already.
Oh, my God.
And
this was so great. This was so great, where I would be delighted to stay with you at Churchill and visit with my brother and your delightful family, who I regret that I have not gotten to know, blah, blah, blah. And then to Alicia, she's like, I actually learned all the kids' names. Like, it's this big ordeal. They probably have like 2 or 3 kids, right? Yeah. They don't have like a litter of like 10 children running around. But it's so, she's just like, I even learned their names. Like, I'm really trying to get her to like me. Like, she just doesn't call them like the blonde one and the brown haired one.
Those little rugrat.
Yes.
And one of them, she even says, oh, I'm going to take little Frederick on my lap and sigh over him for his dear uncle's sake, her departed husband's sake, and pretend to see a likeness and all this stuff. And it's like, it's choreographed to the max.
Yes, choreographed. That is a beautiful way of discussing it. Because that is basically, it's a big dance. That's what it is. She does a dance, like you say, tap dancing, but that's what she does.
And another thing is when she and Reginald quarrel, and he says, this is when they're at Churchill, and they quarrel over Frederica and Sir James, and he's like, why are you forcing her into marrying him, blah, blah, blah. So they quarrel. And then Reginald goes into the living room, and he announces to his sister, Catherine, he's like, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And then...
Bring my horse.
Immediately.
Like the coach was called for or something like that.
That's right. And then Lady Susan just says, writes to him and says, please come into my dressing room. And so he comes and they have this talk, and it immediately changes his mind. And one of the things she does is she's like, no, you stay. I must leave.
Yes. And she says something like, I've heard that you are leaving, and I hope that it is not any fault of mine, nothing that I have done that would drive you away.
I would never break up your family party, you deserve to be
angry. She's upset because she's trying to get Frederica to marry Sir James. And Frederica, obviously cannot convince Lady Susan otherwise. So like you said, she writes Reginald the letter to please convince my mother not to make me marry this awful guy. So Lady Susan is very pissed off that Frederica went outside the chain of command. So that's why they have this big row, because Frederica wrote Reginald a letter and spilled got him involved in their business.
Right. And she's just, there are a number of things that she just tap dances around like that. I'm trying to think of more examples.
It's like she's on a balance beam and through the whole book, and there's kind of the things stack up against. She's carrying one of those weighted things that people do when they walk between buildings and things like that. And the number of lies and machinations and things just keeps building up on it, getting heavier and heavier. And she still has to balance the razor's edge. And then eventually it all falls apart right at the end.
And I think there's an interesting idea in here that, as I said, Austen carried on later. But I actually think that in Austen, the most the characters that she rewards, the most moral characters, are the people who are able to bring their true selves in line with what society expects of them. So, in other words,
they don't have to compromise.
They don't have to compromise. People like Mary Crawford and Henry Crawford are always keeping their true snarky observations back, or their money motivated observations back, because they have to present themselves like the good little girls and boys that they were all supposed to be. And the Bertram's the same thing, and that was what's so fascinating about Mansfield Park. And here we have this huge disparity between what Lady Susan presents to the world and what she really thinks and feels. And if you are too good at managing those two different personalities, I think that there's a little bit of a moral consequence to that. And I think that's one of the things she's sort of saying. So those who can bring their true feelings into alignment with what society demands, they think and feel, that's an achievement that Austen celebrates, and that we'll never get there. I mean, sometimes you're just too smart you just understand what's going on at a higher level. Yeah. But yeah, people who machinate in Austen usually wind up being the most amoral characters and the ones that get their comeuppance in the end, which may be true about other authors, but I think the difference between your inner feelings and your outer presentation is the key in Austen, I think. And the thing about Reginald is that he's not playing a game at all. And so he's totally sincere. And so he's totally in love with her. And with Manwaring, her other lover, he's described in the letters that when she's talking about him, he's described as always having the right thing to say to put you in good humor with yourself and all the world. And so he's a little bit slick like that too.
Well, he's like a Wickham character, it sounds like.
Like a Wickham character, yeah. And so I
okay, so Kristen, let me ask you a question. Do you think that, and I got this impression, I wouldn't go so far as to say that Lady Susan loved Reginald, but did you get the impression that she did genuinely like him and she was starting to develop actual feelings for him? It wasn't just a game to play while she was there. It seemed to me like you kind of read between the lines of some of her letters and she did actually start to like him.
What do you think, actually? Let me ask you.
Well, I did. I felt like, and then so when he wrote her, it was like, I know everything. And of course she's trying to like get him back, but I did get the feeling that there was some regret there, that she did actually. And you could, again, drawing a comparison between her and Henry Crawford is really interesting. And I think it's really spot on because we had this conversation about Henry Crawford. Like, do you think he really loved Fanny? And the narrator tells us that he did. And I wouldn't say that Lady Susan loved Reginald, but I think it was clear that she was starting to develop real feelings for him.
Yeah. And, she even says that at the beginning. She says when she's talking to Alicia, she's like, I think I said this before, but she's like, I'm a romantic at heart. And she does, I mean, that's part of the reason.
Doesn't she joke and say, maybe I will just marry him? Doesn't she say that like as a joke?
Yeah.
Like, when she says that, you're kind of like, I think she might kind of mean that.
Yeah. And the whole thing about him and Frederica is that he just seems so discerning that she never just gets any real color to her character. And so you don't get as invested in that relationship as you sort of get invested in Lady Susan's more, she's less of a valuable person or whatever, but that's just so much more interesting.
Right.
her romantic life. Yeah.
Right. For sure.
And so anyway, I'm really looking forward for you to see the movie because Whit Stillman did some really interesting things with the characters. And he also, by the way, did a novelization.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. So he took
a novel, adapted it to a film, and then wrote a novel from his screenplay.
Yes, so you can read Lady Susan not in epistolary form, and it's clever. I mean, when I first started reading it, it felt like Austen fanfic to me because nobody can write like Austen, and I've tried to read. I'll admit to reading a lot of Austen fanfic in search.
I find that shocking, and I can't believe that you would read Austen fanfic. Now, when you say Austen fanfic, are you talking about the novels that are published, or are you talking about like 2 a.m. you're up on the internet, like in some forgotten corner of Reddit, like reading weird fanfic that someone has written? Be honest.
Internet fanfic all the way.
Oh, yeah.
I've also read a // adaptation, which I did, but it is an actual... but
of Lady Susan or of
Pride and Prejudice. I'm sorry, I did.
Okay. But yeah, I would believe like Lady Susan and Alicia like at school experimented.
Yeah. Oh my God, because it's the quality of female friendship which is present in so many of Austen's novels. When you think about it, the core relationship that main characters in Austen have, not only are we interested in their romantic relationships, but often they don't have a lot of screen time with the man that they love. They have the screen time with, so it's Elizabeth and Jane,
Right.
Eleanor Marianne, Catherine Morland, and Isabella Thorpe, and later Catherine Morland and Eleanor Tilney, right? So that's Northanger Abbey. And then Emma and her erroneous choice of her female friend, you know, but also Emma and Miss Taylor. So it's always that there's a core female friendship that I think.
Although Emma is interesting in that her love interest starts out almost like not a female friend, but like a brother, like a family member, because this is a function of the time where women would not be unchaperoned with a potential love interest. Except in Emma's case, it's almost like he was her brother. He was her neighbor. They grew up around each other. So for her to be with Mr. Knightley, it wasn't a big deal. They could go walk together alone or shoot at each other's dogs, and it was okay.
As it's shown in the movie. And
in the Emma Hunger Games mashup that will be coming to a theater near you.
And, you know, it's always the... Actually, that I would totally pay money to watch that.
Pride and Prejudice and Zombies and Emma and the Hunger Games.
Emma and the Hunger Games. Emma, I don't know if she would be a good Hunger Games contestant. I feel like she would be very ruthless, actually, like a Katniss.
Yeah, she would be very ruthless. She would be like a Cersei. Okay, a more pop culture reference. She'd be like a Cersei Lannister, and that she's extremely ruthless, but not as smart as she thinks she is. Yeah. So her attempts to form, and her attempts to, what is it they call it? Oh God, my brain is shutting down. In Hunger Games, where they get friends and alliances. Her attempts to form alliances with other players would probably end badly. And by badly, I mean by being horribly killed.
Yeah, most likely. I don't think you could root for her to be the winner of the Hunger Games. I think she would be the villain. She certainly wouldn't have cared about Rue. She would have been like, Rue, you don't matter.
She's from a rich district, but she's never been hungry, so she would get desperate really quickly. Oh, that would be so interesting. Oh my God, the fanfic is writing itself. Because Emma's never been hungry, so she would be like from one of the districts, like District 1 or 2. So as soon as she did get hungry, she would get really desperate and make really awful decisions and turn very savage.
Fanny Price would be crying in the corner. Marianne would be crying in the corner. I think Eleanor Dashwood would win the Hunger Games.
Oh my God. Oh my God. We need to write like a Austen heroines or characters fanfic Hunger Games where they're just tossed into the arena.
You've seen the Jane Austen Fight Club. Have you seen Jane Austen Fight Club?
No.
Oh yeah, I have to post it on the Facebook page. It's this hilarious internet video, obviously. Yeah, the Jane Austen Fight Club, and it's all the heroines, and they.
Oh my God. It's like epic rap battles through. Except I would say.
Oh my God, we have to have Austen characters do epic rap battles. Oh my God.
I actually think Lady Susan would win the Hunger Games.
Wait, is there no
Eleanor would be really good in that she's very practical, and she is. We're gonna have to do a whole other episode.
Yeah, who would win the Hunger Games?
Where we just like break down a Hunger Games style. So amazing. We're not going to spend too much time talking about it now, but that will be a future episode. Yeah. I will make this promise on air.
Yeah, I think we need to do that. I mean,
when we run out of novels and we have to come up with bullshit to talk about to fill podcast, we will go back and we will do a Hunger Games Austen characters.
And you know what? I'm going to say that this podcast has been such good therapy for me that I'm actually fine with that. There would have been a time where I would have been afraid to do such a podcast because of the ridicule that would be surely heaped upon me.
But that's the whole point of this podcast. That's our own mission statement, Kristen. Yeah, that's why. Oh my God, I'm so glad though that you feel that this is helping you, because the mission statement is to like not care about the haters, and yet I understand that you feel like, but I do care about the haters. But no, no. We don't care about the haters.
All out.
We'll do a Hunger Games style discussion, and we can also do a like Jane Austen's superlatives, like whose house you'd most want to dine at. We'll just come up with some like ridiculous categories.
Yeah, we should do.
And people can vote. Oh my God. We'll post them on the Facebook page and then people can vote. And that'll be another future episode when we need to fill up time.
With regard to Austen fanfic, I don't think I've read a whole lot of Lady Susan. I don't think there's a lot of Lady Susan fanfic.
Well, again, it's not very, but this is rife for fanfic.
It is
because it's all letters too.
Yeah, and I have to admit, especially being really young and being obsessed with Pride and Prejudice, and having not read the other novels, I went on to, this was in the 90s, and there's this website, the Republic
when the internet was first born.
Yeah, the Republic of Pemberley. And people were posting fanfic all over that thing. And there were definitely some bedroom scenes. I mean, people let their imaginations go, which is fine. I support that. But yeah, you quickly realize that it's not scratching any kind of itch.
Yeah,
it's weird phrasing, but it's not really filling that need you have for more Austen, because it's just playtime. All of a sudden, we're taking these characters and we're putting them into all these pat situations. Okay,
well, let me ask you, bringing it back to Lady Susan, let me ask you another question, which is kind of related to this fanfic thing. If you were going to read correspondence between two characters in Lady Susan who don't ever write each other, which characters would you want to read their letters? So maybe they don't even really meet, but if you were going to read someone writing a letter to someone else that does not correspond in the book, who would you choose?
What would you think about Mainwaring himself, and Alicia Johnson talking about...
I was definitely going to say Alicia Johnson. I want to read with Alicia Johnson. I want to hear more about her husband's gout, first of all.
Yeah, first of all. There was somebody who...
Because doesn't he come... So who does it that Alicia so Mainwaring goes to Lady Susan's apartment or hotel room, whatever, in London every afternoon. He spends time with her every afternoon. A little afternoon delight, if you know what I'm saying. But then Alicia is tasked with keeping someone busy during that time. Who is it that she is? I can't remember. Is it Reginald she's supposed to?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so Alicia writing to Mainwaring and Mainwaring writing to Alicia. Maybe setting this up.
Setting the stage and referring to Lady Susan and in the most glowing of terms and how much they love her. I think that would be cute because he's supposed to be a very charming man. Yeah. So I'm interested.
And there are only two male characters who write letters. One letter from Reginald and Catherine Vernon's father, Lord de Courcy.
Yeah.
And then Reginald gets, I think, 3 letters, 2 of which are very short.
That's fascinating. And
that's it.
That's another feminist thing about this that I never even occurred to me.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Now, I'm sure a lot of that, you could say that a lot of that makes sense because the women would have the time to correspond for leisure and for social purposes. Lord de Courcy, I'm sure, doesn't have a lot of time for social correspondence because he does the lord of an estate. And Reginald is the heir, but when he's hanging out at Churchill, he's probably not doing a lot of business unless he's getting with Lady Susan. That's his business. But you know what I mean? It's kind of like women would be the ones who would write.
Yeah, they're
these sort of letters.
The art
but still, it's pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely stuck out to me when I was reading it that this is almost fully female voices in this book, in this novel.
Excellent. Well, good.
Which I thought was really interesting.
Well, good. So I think that probably is what all I have to say really about Lady Susan. Yeah. I don't know if we want to wrap it up here for now.
It's just a very fun, light. If you liked Northanger Abbey, you will really like Lady Susan. If you want an intro to Austen, I think this is actually really good. It is epistolary, and none of her other published novels are epistolary. But if you want an intro to Austen that's short, that's fun, this will serve you very well.
Just pick it up. It takes an evening to listen to.
Yeah. I read it while I was on the treadmill, and it just took a couple sessions. It didn't take a huge amount.
Did I say listen to? I meant read, obviously.
Oh, well, you know what? I did. Speaking of which, I read it, and then earlier, a couple days ago, just to kind of refresh my memory, I listened to the audiobook, which was the part of Lady Susan was read by the actress who you really Harriet Walter, who was in Emma, who played Mrs. Elton. And when we were talking about Emma, the film, you mentioned that she reads a lot of Austen novels and is excellent. What is that her name? What's her name?
Juliet Stevenson is her name, if I'm not mistaken. Juliet, somebody is the one I was thinking that plays Mrs. Elton in the Gwyneth.
Okay, well, hang on a second. Let me confirm. I've got my little phone here. If Bay was here, he could do it. We're Stan's producer, which is why this episode has gone completely off the rails.
I don't know if it's gone off the rails. I mean,
okay, well, Harriet Walter, she has definitely been in Austen. Oh, she was in Sense and Sensibility. That's what it is. My bad. She was a really funny sister-in-law in Sense and Sensibility, who.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. For when the girl who's a character who confesses that she's secretly engaged to her brother, she has a secret engagement, and then she goes, "What?" and like pulls her hair and like throws her. Yeah. Anyway, she reads Lady Susan's letters in the audiobook I listened to, and it's fantastic.
She's excellent. Good. So it's good.
Highly recommend. I think I just got it from the library. I found it as an e-audiobook from my library. So do we have any old business to discuss?
I don't think we have any old business other than thank you. We get a couple of emails that we really appreciated, and we love hearing from you. And we heard from someone in Australia.
That was a delightful email. It was so Australian, the way. And also, I was told to lay off the sauce, which is why. Well, I also went to 4 wineries last night, so sorry. Bay and I did a wine tour yesterday, but I am not drinking tonight. And I took the advice of our listener and emailer who was like, Maggie, you might not want to drink so much wine when podcasting. I think uncouth might have been a word.
No, I'm very guilty of that as well over the last 2 episodes because of the stress of the move. I drank a lot. I used the podcast as an excuse to drink a lot, and I don't want to present that necessarily as always drunk Kristen, so I did not drink
our
either.
Listeners understand. I mean, they know that you're not like a booze hound. Obviously, you're very intelligent and very well spoken. And when we get together, this podcast, it's like getting a glimpse at our letters, where we can just kind of like be our wicked selves, right?
Yeah, wicked selves.
Yeah, it's like listening to a girls' night where we literally would sit around and talk about Austen and drink wine. So you're getting to peek that facet of our personalities, of our correspondence with one another. So people know Kristen, and I have only heard positive things about Tipsy Kristen on the podcast. People know.
Good. Okay, good. Well, I kind of when I was editing that movie commentary, I kind of came to the mortifying realization that when I'm drunk, I actually am not quite as funny as I think I am. I'm just sort of louder and cruder. So
I don't think that's true. I think that you are very funny.
Well,
I think that watching you think that you're funny when you're drunk is funny. So.
Yeah.
So I loved listening to it.
I was like being delighted by myself and laughing at all my own jokes.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, then thank you.
I kept getting emails from Kristen when she was editing it. Like, why am I singing? Why am I trying to talk in an English accent? It's so awful. Why do I think it's funny?
Accent. Oh, I'm so sorry.
And I'm like, shut up, people. No, I'm like, shut up, Kristen. It's lovely. People, it's so cute. People love it. She's like, I know. I can never listen to myself again.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, there was a lot of singing and a lot of British accenting going on. It was mortifying to have to edit that one, but thank you. And thank you to everybody who listens. And the Australian person, I won't say your name because I actually didn't ask if I could, but thank you. And she has a boyfriend who loves Austen.
Yes,
so we
good
just
for her.
Congratulate her. She found one.
They're out there. So thank you for emailing us. We love getting emails. I'm not using hyperbole there. We really do love getting emails. Kristen, why don't you share our email address?
Our email address is firstimpressionspodcast@gmail.com. And you can put the dots, first.impression.podcast, or you can leave them off, either way.
And you can also find our Facebook page at First Impressions Podcast on Facebook, which we update a couple times a week with things. Kristen shared a very hysterical meme a couple days ago featuring Darcy hipster, Mr. Darcy as a hipster, which people really enjoyed.
Yeah, yeah. Maggie's good at Facebook. If you ever see a post on the Facebook page and you think that's kind of a square post, that one came from me.
Well, I also post, when I post, I do it in the voice of a like our fake imaginary social media coordinator, where I'll refer to us in the third person, like Maggie, Kristen, our blah blah blah. You know, it's totally just me. But I like to pretend like we have a staff. And that we have a social media coordinator who's in charge of our Facebook posts, and so has to write like very formal and refer to us in the third person.
Yes, exactly. Well, we're also making mega millions on this podcast, guys. Clearly.
Oh yeah, we should start getting. You know, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and they always have. You know, they do ads in the middle, and they have sponsors, and so I mean, we could get Audible. They always get Audible, or like Stamps.com. I wonder who we could get to be good.
Right? The mattress companies, Casper or whatever.
Yes, it's some like weird, like shit rich white people buy company where it's like $20 socks or something like that. I listened to this great podcast called The Black Tapes, which is really creepy. I super recommend it, by the way. But their ads are for like Stamps.com or like some kind of weird socks, and you're like, really? What would be a good sponsor for us, Kristen? Or maybe I'll make this a Facebook page question. Like, who should we ask to sponsor the podcast? What would be a good match?
Goodness.
I can't really think of anything. It's kind of a niche audience.
Maybe, yeah. I was going to say Jasna should sponsor us, but they don't really.
Or a winery.
Or a winery.
How about an Idaho winery that needs the exposure?
Oh, yes, but we don't have Idaho listenership except for my husband. So Idaho.
You said Kevin doesn't actually listen to the podcast.
They do download onto his phone, so it looks like we have an Idaho listener. They do auto downloads every time I see one from Idaho. Yeah, Idaho needs to step up their game. So maybe if I make some friends in Boise, which I don't have any friends in Boise, but maybe if I make one, then they'll have an Idaho listenership. But you know where we do have a listener, everybody? Saudi Arabia. So
wow,
amazing! So welcome,
that is really cool.
Saudi Arabia.
So Kristen, when are you going to out yourself to your work colleagues that you do a Jane Austen podcast?
You know, I've been so drunk on some of these episodes that I'm not sure I should.
You have not been that drunk, though. That's the thing. You think you are, but you're totally comprehensible.
Thank you.
Still make excellent points. It's not like you fall out of frame.
There's that one time I did go like this in front of your face to get more wine, though.
But that was just funny. I mean, that was just, that was just fun.
Okay.
So we need more Idaho. Do we have any states that are not represented? Do you know off the top of your head?
We don't have the Dakotas.
All right, Dakota, step it up. If you guys, listeners, if you know anyone in Idaho, North Dakota, South Dakota, where else? I'm sure the Plains states could use more representation.
Right, Plains states. We don't have Louisiana. I do not believe we have Nebraska.
Nebraska. Okay.
So
maybe we can travel to these places and do live podcasts and try to get people.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So we need some exposure there.
Hello, Omaha.
Alabama, Mississippi, nobody. So they need to step up their
Austin. We gotta get the southern states. Okay, deep south, step up.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. We had a really good time. So we will be back soon with a love and friendship discussion to compare contrast novel film.
Yes, and I'm really looking forward to it, and there's a ton to say. And I have an amazing story about me and Whit Stillman, who are now best friends, that I have not even told Maggie that I'm saving.
Okay, well, don't tell me before, because then I'll have something to look forward to.
Yes, okay. All right, thanks everybody. Talk to you soon.
All right, thanks everyone. Bye.